Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you're watching us from. It's an exciting moment for all of us being here and to have everybody watching us online. First of all, let me just begin by acknowledging that we have audience and people watching from different places and from different platforms. We have YouTube channel that is live. We also have Express, that people follow the conversation in. And so we are really excited to have all of you being part of this conversation. We come here together today to learn and to unlearn probably the things that we thought we knew, and so every day is a learning, but also to envision a productive and resilient agriculture sector that delivers for all of us. Remember, agriculture is at the core of everyday life, from our households to business places, and ranging from processing to exports and transportation system as well. So agriculture is at the core of almost everything that we talk about. And so what we want to do today here is, we want to leave here informed, inspired, and ready to go out there and shape the agriculture function. So I promise you that you have the cream of the top cream of knowledge and information and the brains behind policy making and agriculture decision making process. So today we'll talk about what is happening with the agriculture sector. Why is it not? We talk about how valuable it is, in everything else that we do. But is that importance reflecting in the policy, in the budgets that we make every day? Now, this panel here and myself will talk about what is there and what is broken and what is possible. What can we do better to make agriculture, working and functioning? Now, I'll begin by talking about a couple of things just to set the conversation, and then I'll introduce our panel to give us insights and from practice, but also from the experience. Everyone is a farmer at the end of the day. You have a garden in your farm, and you have a couple of other things that you're doing. Now, so I will talk about, first of all, just give you to set the pace and the stage for this conversation. I'll talk about the promise and what is reality. So if you read public policy documents, you read region of standard that or benchmark in Africa, in the previously Maputo declaration, but also recently in Kampala, our governments made reaffirmed this declaration that 10% of the budget should go to the agriculture sector. Now, at the county level, we also still have counties not financing, and I'll just give examples of Nyeri and Makueni counties. So in Nyeri, 3.2% of the budget goes to agriculture. In Makueni, it's about 4.6%. So you see, at the county level, at national level, we're still ranging around just 3.8, 3 point something. Now, the budget at national level is, and I'm talking about the budget that is allocable to, functions. So we're talking about, 2.4 trillion, which can be allocated to different sectors and services. Kenya's budget over the last 3 years has been around 2.4, ranging around there. But agriculture budget has been coming down. What it means is that the role of agriculture is not reflecting, because if the budget is not growing, then at least agriculture then should be also then maintaining its budget, but its budget is coming down, which is a concern. Like a key insight for us from this is that, you know, if Kenya says agriculture is important, but it's not reflecting in the budget, then it means Kenya is diverting from the target that it sets for itself. If you want the economy to be driven by agriculture, but you're not financing, then you're not driving towards what you want to achieve. Similarly, it moves away from the commitment it makes. If in Kampala, for example, we declared that 10% of the budget then needs to go to agriculture, but we are not getting there. So it means we're moving away from the target that we set for ourselves. And then so as the financing of the sector then is just comparing Kenya and other places, because I mean, you can say Kenya is not meeting the target, but is everybody else meeting the target? Now, so let's just compare Kenya with a few other countries. Ethiopia, Malawi, Senegal are examples of countries that have met a 10% benchmark. But then there's something that happens in these countries. Of course, I mean, we compare to Kenya because we also have to be fair to Kenya, but still acknowledging the fact that we haven't met a threshold, is that these countries are centralized. Centralized systems. Kenya has a devolved system, which means if agriculture is devolved, if we have to account level to just see that's 10% then of the total spending of government, not just the total national government budget or county government budget is meeting the 10% threshold. Part of the challenge that we are not able to do that is because there's no standardized way of looking at what is agriculture, what does constitute agriculture in Kenya, and that's part of the challenge. So I said 3.8% of the budget is going to agriculture, and that is budget going to livestock, irrigation, and the agriculture function itself, what is called agriculture in the budget. So we still don't know what constitutes agriculture for that 10% to be met. And then even when you're looking at different kinds of budget, you have a road that is supporting agriculture. Is that road counting as an agriculture investment? That's the question. So we need better tracking in terms of what kind of spending should be considered agriculture, even if it is not within the agriculture function itself. So those are some of the weaknesses that we find even as we look at our budgets are meeting those global standards that Kenya sets for itself. And I think the critical question for me to ask at this point is that should financing focus solely on the benchmarks that we set at 10% now Kampala declaration, or should we also think about, and this is a question for all of us, but also for our audience, following us in our socials, to think about what is the best way for us to get the financing of agriculture to the level that the sector needs are met. I think it's for us to kind of think, is the benchmark the best way to go about it? What are the other complementary mechanisms for us to talk about, financing the agriculture sector? Now, let's talk about something else. So when financing of the sector, or even its budgets coming down, there are certain, of course, implications. Because if you finance higher this year, and then you finance lower next year, something has to give way, for that reduction. Now, so we look at what's happening, and I'll give just a couple of examples, looking at, when the budget reduced compared to last year for the agriculture function. Irrigation is a key casualty. So last year, the irrigation function received 22.2 billion. No, that was in 2023-24. When you compare in 2025-26, that budget has reduced to 17.4 billion. Now, this is happening when Kenya's irrigable capacity is only 3%. What it means is that only 3% of irrigated, land that can be irrigated is covered in Kenya. Now, we have the National Irrigation Master Plan 2019, which targets 10% by 2030. 30 over a period of time. Now, if the budget is coming down, we're also diverting from the target, because the budget for irrigation should then be going up. Post-harvest losses, as high as 40% in places like Nyeri, Mangos in Makueni and other places are getting wasted. But still, when you look at the budget, you don't see investment in terms of how can we secure the produce by, first of all, making sure like we're not losing. This can be storage, this can be value addition, and a couple of other ways that we can secure that. Mechanization is another one. Part of the reason why produce in other places are cheaper is because people are mechanizing farming. Now in Kenya, in places like Nyeri, for example, they reduced the budget completely, or actually eliminated the budget for mechanization. A discussion we had with the county assembly members was that, there was wastage and a couple of that, which made sense, but of course we could not get that justification from the budget, which is, unfortunate. But then, if we are moving away from technology or the innovative ways of doing farming for us to be productive, it also means we are not heading towards the right direction as a country in terms of how we invest. And then just to kind of, say a few more things as I close this, is that there is also governance and coordination gaps. So, and I will talk about irrigation again. So irrigation is a function, like generally agriculture is a devolved function. And now let me pick irrigation as an example to show how the coordination and governance system is not, supporting agriculture. So irrigation is supposed to be a county function, because all the farmers are there anyway. But national government still, of course, holds major irrigation that cuts across different counties. However, if you look at the budget, the national government still has irrigation projects that are county specific. And this is really something for us to be concerned about, because if projects like Aror and Jepkum irrigation schemes in Elgeyo Marakwet County are under national government, then what is county government supposed to be doing? Right? Like that is something that for us to kind of think about, how do we coordinate better the functions, so that then functions that are supposed to be county level then are taken care of by at the county level. And then of course, just that is just an example of several other things that are happening. And with that kind of background, I now want to invite, the panel to kind of react on this, but also then, for us to get this conversation going, because we have to think about, with all these challenges that are happening, we need to fix that. How do we fix that? And now, with me today, I have, like I promised, I have a very serious panel. I've got not serious, that scares you, but serious in terms of what they do and the knowledge they have. So I have Agatha Thuo, who's the CEO for Agriculture Sector Network in Kenya. So this is the umbrella body of the private sector that are in agriculture sector in the country. Agatha is a dynamic leader, with extensive experience in both public and private agriculture sectors. Expertise spans agriculture transformation, including policy alignment, advocacy, value chain development, project management, monitoring and evaluation. She also has a deep understanding of devolved agriculture systems, which makes her, the right person to be in this conversation. We're talking about, the disconnect between what's happening at national and county level. And she also has knowledge on intergovernmental relations, shaped roles in national programs like NALEP, KEPAP, and as a county executive member for one of the counties in Kenya, which you will say as she goes about. Currently, she serves as the CEO for Agriculture Sector Network, where she champions private sector coordination, policy advocacy, capacity building, and trade facilitation. Agatha holds influential position on several national and regional bodies, including Tekemeo Institute, National Technical Advisory Committee for the World Bank funded project, the COMESA Food Balance Sheet Steering Committee, and the National Horticulture Task Force. And then I have Timothy Njaki, a partial equilibrium specialist at Modeling Services Center, African Network for Agriculture Policy Research Institute, ANAPRI. Timothy is seasoned development economist with deep expertise in development planning, policy implementation, and agriculture research. He has led impactful studies on agriculture, rural development, and food systems in Kenya and Sub-Saharan Africa. He is a published scholar and regular policy commendator. Currently, he serves as a partial equilibrium specialist at the Modeling Services Center of ANAPRI, and previously held senior research at Tegemeo Institute and National Treasury and Planning in Kenya. His research focuses on agriculture productivity, technology adoption, governance and climate resilience, and systems efficiency. He holds a PhD in development economics and masters in international development CRIPS. Is committed to advancing solutions for food security and poverty reduction in developing countries. And then, welcome to the discussion. And then we have Magdalene, Deputy CEO, Kenya National Farmers and Federation, Kenya National Farmers Federation. Magdalene is a Deputy CEO at the KENAF in short, where she leads program development and innovation to empower smallholder farmers across Kenya. She has championed transformative initiatives that prepare farmers to actively participate in a digital financial economy, bridging the divide between national agriculture and modern technology-enabled service delivery. Magdalene has been instrumental in rolling out inclusive platforms such as Sauti ya Mkulima, very interesting, digital extension services, the Microsoft Urban project, all designed to enhance farmers' digital visibility, improve access to finance, extension advisory, and market linkages with strong focus on youth and women. Our work is driven by the conviction that farmers must be digitally equipped, visible, and connected to thrive today's economy. She remains leading voice in national dialogues on agriculture financing, farmer-led advocacy, transformative role of data and digital systems in reshaping Kenya's agri-food systems. Welcome, Magdalene, to the discussion. Now, I want us to get to this conversation and get it going. Now, the first question I have for you is just your initial reaction to what I just said at the very beginning, right? So this is a space you've been. You've held positions, you've shaped policies and decisions at different places. And I just want to go and you know, by just asking you to just reflect, like, what is your initial reaction in 30 seconds of what I just said, the caps and that, you know, are these things that are real? Are they things that, you know, as researchers, you know, make it up for ourselves, or, you know, we don't understand what we're saying? As a practitioner, as someone who's been in this space, what's your reaction? So let's begin with Agatha.
Yeah, thank you, Timothy. I think what we have alluded to is actually a correct position in terms of especially the financing of the agriculture sector, public financing of the agriculture sector in Kenya. I think you can see for some time now the financing has been going down other than increasing, which is quite contrary to our agenda at the moment, because the national agenda is to transform the agriculture sector. So I quite agree with you on that. And as you've also mentioned that I have been a CEC in charge of agriculture and also conversant with intergovernmental relations. There are certain functions that also need to be performed by the counties now that agriculture is devolved to the counties.
Great. Thank you very much. We'll talk about that just in a bit. Timothy.
So thank you so much. I think my first reflection is that, yeah, what you said is true, that the share of agriculture in the budget has been going down. However, we need to point out that when you think about the nominal funding, that has been going up. So when you look at the actual cash that is being allocated to the sector, that one has gone up. But the share, which is now what you're saying, the slice of the cake, the slice of the cake has been smaller. The other thing that I think we need to think beyond how much we are allocating. We also need to start asking, where are we investing? So the challenge we see right now is that the government is competing with the private sector instead of crowding in the private sector. So like the example you gave about mechanization, I think the question there is, who should invest in mechanization? So how much money should go to the public sector? How much money should go to the private sector? What investments rather should be made by the private sector? But I think if we are talking about the government starting to lease tractors, that is not transformative.
Absolutely.
When we think about countries that are moving forward, that tends to be a private sector function. So the key thing is, for these functions that we are talking about, what role should the government play? And then the last one, which is more like a correction, I think we do have methods that allow us to track expenditures even across different sectors. Up to this year, which is, we've been now tracking Malabo, we've been using the COFOG. This is classification of government expenditures that was developed by FAO, and I think everybody adopts that methodology. And then what that methodology does is to set parameters and perimeters. So we are able to track, for example, now the 3.8% that you are talking about, it is tracking the core agriculture sector, which is what we know, agriculture, livestock, fisheries. Remember, in our setting, fisheries is no longer in agriculture. It's in a different ministry. But we are still able to track those expenditures. Then we're able to track expenditures in trade. We're able to track expenditures in health. We're able to track expenditure in roads. And roads, we've also set aside which roads are we tracking. So when we build the superhighway, that one, in our view, does not support agriculture.
We'll talk about that.
Yes, we'll come and talk about that. But we have that method. And now I think that we are currently working on the next method that will be used to track the Kampala. So the Kampala, I think the agreement is that we'll not be using COFOG. We'll be using the agri-food systems tracking system. And I think that one, we hope that once the AU finalizes that, it will be shared to the different members. States for them to start building systems to track that expenditure.
We'll come to that. We'll come and talk about all that. And then the farmer. You know, if we can talk about the experience of the farmer and everybody else, of course, within the value chain. But first of all, just the reflection of, you know, quick thoughts on what I just said.
Sure. So to reflect what you mentioned, even when we're talking about budget allocation to agriculture, and also just to say that even as a government, they haven't met the commitment that they made both in Maputo and Malabo declaration. So we are still falling far behind to that. I also used to look at what has been allocated. How does that translate into farm investment? Because you'll find that most of this allocation will go into projects, will go into projects. So how does that affect a farmer with the allocation that has been made? So in even our discussion, at the end of the day, we have to look at how is the allocation that has made, how is it affecting the farmer? With the recent budget that was read and passed, is that we'll find that there is some exceptions that were initially there on input for the farmers have been removed. So that means that there's an increase in production cost for the farmer, and that really affects food security.
Great. Well, thanks for these reflections, and it kind of just adds to you know, what we've been talking about and what we're going to talk about in the next moment, and it also helps our audience to kind of like start understanding you know, some of the gaps and opportunities that are there. You know, there are systems that we put in place and we need to use them better. But I think that what is coming from this initial reflection is that it's good that, you know, the sector is financed to the level that, you know, it's desired, but also we also need to look at that financing that the sector is getting right now. What is it used for? And is it being used for prudently, accountably? So there are two parts of, you know, moving parts here. So we want to, first of all, get the sector financed, but we also want to look at what the sector is getting, you know, to get us, you know, productivity levels to the level we want. Now, I want to just go to, you know, some of the questions I have, and then, you know, our audience will also then, you know, have an opportunity to also ask questions, and then we can be able to kind of have this conversation together, both here in the studio, but also in the platforms that we're in. I'll start with you know, Agatha, and from your leadership, you know, experience, how has the private sector influenced national and county budget priorities? What has been the challenges and wins in doing that?
Yeah, thank you very much. That's a very good question because you see, production is by the private sector, and actually, if you look at the role of government and the role of the private sector in agriculture, we have very, very distinct roles because the government is supposed to guide in policy, but partly we also influence policies, and when sometimes we think that policies are not right, we have opportunity to work on policies. But let me talk about the private sector as an implementer of government policies. And I think that is where sometimes we are having a conflict. If you look at some of the responsibilities and the roles that the government has taken, they are actually crowding out the private sector, just like Tim said. And if you look at the private sector, agriculture, or the role of agriculture, let me talk about the contribution of agriculture. First of all, agriculture is responsible for food security, food and nutrition security. The other thing is that the agriculture sector is supposed to create jobs. At the moment, we are creating just about 40% of the jobs in the country, but 70% in the rural areas. But we can do more than that. We can do more than that, especially if we let the different institutions do what they are best, known to do. For example, if you look at some of the programs that the government is implementing, they should best be left to the private sector. We have done a study, for example, on fertilizer subsidy implementation. Look at agriculture as a source of wealth creation, and at the same time creation of employment. Now, if you look at, for example, the distribution of fertilizers in this country, we have about 18,000 agro dealers distributed all over, let me say, most of the parts of this country. But if you look at the way we are distributing our fertilizers, we are definitely killing jobs. And I can confirm this because some of our agro dealers, they are members of our associations, and they'll tell you people or individuals have lost jobs because they can no longer dispense fertilizer, and fertilizer is a very important input. The other thing is that some of the investments that the government is making needs to be made in tandem with the private sector. In tandem with the private sector. There are some investments that the government can get into where the private sector cannot go. For example, in this country, we are losing between 30 to 40% to post-harvest losses. And some of the investments, if you ask me, should go into supporting infrastructure that can bring down the cost, the post-harvest losses in this country. So where the private sector cannot invest, for example, in storage, adequate storage in the counties, that is where the government needs to do. And I believe that the counties are capable of doing this with the support, because that is in line with the constitution, with the support and the capacity strengthening from the national government. The counties can invest and have sufficient infrastructure to be able to support that. Let me now come also to irrigation, for example. Irrigation can be left to the private sector. The private sector actors can actually support some of the irrigation projects that are not going right. We've heard of cases where irrigation projects are not going right. For example, where the government is investing so much and government officials are taking care of that, some of that work can be given out to the private sector. And one of the things that I'm very happy about that the government is doing, this land, this land leasing framework that the private sector members can actually be able to get land from the national government. I think that is very, very positive, because if for example I own an irrigation project, I'll be able to take care of it better than the government would otherwise do. Because if something belongs to government, it literally belongs to nobody. So for me, I think one thing is that the government is crowding out the private sector, and I think they really need to let the private sector. They really need to let the private sector thrive.
Absolutely. So there are things that the government can do. There are things the private sector can do, and we need to kind of like delineate this so that then whoever is better placed to play certain role, then they are given that opportunity to play that role for efficiency purposes. And I like what you're saying about the private sector brings certain expertise in management of infrastructure. For example, you're talking about education, but I think the other, of course, things on top of that needs to be figured out, like that delivery of service from a private sector. What would that look like? And I think that's what our audience will be interested also to learn. And we can talk about that in a moment, so that we see if private sector led irrigation systems, this is what it would look like. Because I think people learn better with examples.
Can I say
yeah,
for example, when you
in
talk
few
about the
seconds.
private sector,
Yeah.
farmer is private sector.
Yes.
And if we can have farmer-led irrigation programs,
Yeah.
they are very effective because we are saying, let a smallholder farmer take care of what they are doing. We can have a scheme that can be supported. Let the government lay out the infrastructure. But at the end of the day, we let the farmers,
Manage.
individual farmers within their own plot, let them manage that infrastructure, because you'll be able to take care of the activities and be able to plan so that they can effectively be able to grow even what they need to grow and take care of it.
Great. Sounds good. Thank you so much. Tim, so we've talked about this, and I think you've started this conversation about the financing to reach the target of 10%.
Yeah.
So the benchmark of 10%, the recent Cumberland Declaration becomes the more relevant and legitimate, or what is currently standing as a guide for how to finance the sector. On top of that, and first of all, how do we get to that? But second is, what are the other mechanisms that we need to look at? And I'm asking this question from the point of, is there a possibility that we get to 10%, but the sector needs may still not be met? Are there other ways that we can balance between our national and international commitments, plus the sector needs itself, even as we talk about financing?
Okay. So thanks for that. So the 10% basically was a commitment by African head of state made like 20 years back, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And for our economies, it's not a bad target, because I think at that point it wasn't more of what the sector needs, but also trying to think what would be sufficient investments that can trigger transformation vis-a-vis the other needs that the government has to fulfill. So the first question is 10% enough? No, it's not enough if you are to think about the broader needs of the sector.
Yeah.
But it's sufficient enough to kickstart the transformation that we require. How do we know this? We have some studies that have been done. Actually, there's a comparative study that was done a couple of years ago. And basically what it did was to compare Kenya with the East Asian countries. And they paired up. So you had Kenya, Nigeria, Ghana, Ethiopia being compared with countries like Indonesia, Vietnam, Thailand. And for the East Asian countries, they've already gone through their green revolution. So it was a very interesting study, because it's comparing where we are right now to where these countries were 30 years ago, when they were at the peak of their green transformation, the green revolution in Asia. And what they found consistently across the Asian countries, they had an average allocation of 20% of their budget to agriculture and rural development. So that is going to what we are discussing today. Because when you're talking about agriculture and rural development, it also goes into the other supporting sectors in the rural areas that support agriculture. But they had a system of ensuring that they allocated 20% of the national budget to agriculture and rural development. So for us, yes, that basis, we know that when we look at our budget, every year when you look at the sector report for agriculture, for example, like last year's, you'll find that they request that you start with, how much do you need to implement better for this financial year? You'll find that it was about 150 billion. We've only allocated 80. So that's about half. So, and consistently, if you look back, even when we had the big four, we've been allocating between 40 to 50% of the budget. So, and although that one is still low, if that one is 2%, the argument, of course, has been, if we did per 10%, we would go over and above what the sector was asking for. So, the basis we have right now, and as we move forward, is that we didn't do that in the first NIAP. So this is the National Agricultural Investment Plan. We are currently working on the second NIAP. We do have an opportunity to cost it. Last time we never costed it. We just knew that the government would provide about 20% of the resources that would be required to implement NIAP, and the 80% would be coming from the private sector and development partners. But if you're able to cost that, then we can effectively track how much we are spending for whatever allocation we provide for the public sector. And then we can now start tracking the private sector as well. So if we say that we need the private sector to make, let's say, 500 billion worth of investments in the sector over the next 5 to 10 years, we can now start quantifying that. And that will also help bring some facts to the point that Agatha has made. So when we say that we are crowding out, we'll even be able to attach a number of the disinvestments that, this public sector investment, when you are not investing in the right places, will cause. Yeah. So I think, but in a nutshell, yes, 10% is good, but probably not sufficient.
Great.
We may need to think of how we can go beyond that.
Yeah. That'll be interesting, because if we get to a point where we're costing the function, and I will imagine when we cost the agriculture function, we're also costing what is national and what's county, so that then, we start sorting out the issue of overlaps, and stuff. So it would be interesting.
If I can just add something little.
Yeah.
If you look at the African continent, the different countries are within different landscapes. I mean, we are not all growing at the same pace. So when you look at agriculture, for example, in Kenya, and compare it with our level of transformation with another African country, we are quite different. So the 10% is just a benchmark.
Okay, great. I mean, that's really good to know. But still, the question is, we need then to meet that 10%, which is the minimum, to give us the basis of now starting to think about, how do we get ourselves to other developed countries that, invested in agriculture and they're now moving, and agriculture is playing the role that it should play. Now, Magdalene, I'll come to you with this question. You are a practitioner, so based on your work with the smallholder farmers and also as a practitioner in the space, what does the farmer need to efficiently perform in a productive agriculture sector, and what are the biggest barriers farmers face in benefiting from public agricultural investments, including services and public goods and services?
I'll start with that. The sad reality is that a farmer still struggles with accessing inputs, inputs to that matter. Still struggle in accessing markets. Still struggle in accessing finance. And for farmers, when it comes to finance, they are viewed as high-risk customers compared to other professionals. A farmer still struggles with them being able to access extension services. Private sector has really taken up the role, but we've seen government really, when it comes to provision of extension services, to have really gone down. So we can say that we cannot think about bigger things when even the most essential ones, farmers are still struggling with. So that's why, like my point earlier was saying, when you talk about budget allocation, what is the allocation that is directed towards farm investment? Because it starts from there. If a farmer is able to produce well, if a farmer is able to sell their produce and access finance, even with the 22% contribution to the GDP, that would have been increased. And if it is anything that agriculture has shown, is that it's the backbone of the economy in Kenya. But the question begs that, why is it still underfunded? Why is the government still underfunding and under-prioritizing agriculture? So if we can start with the essential, and for majority of the farmers being smallholder farmers, they still, struggle with accessing these services. So as KENAF, of course, is how do we, our work has been really to amplify and to lobby the government, but also now to go out of our way to work with private sector who can be able, who can be able to enable the farmers to access these services. But of course, the government role really needs to be more prominent in terms of how they are prioritizing agriculture.
Interesting. And when you talk about this, credit, extension service, markets, at the core of, the farming, or the agriculture function. Because if you want to move from subsistence to commercial, then you probably need credit, right? If the farmer did not go to university to study agriculture, he inherited the knowledge from a prior generation. So the extension then service becomes very important for the farmer to understand what to grow, when to grow, you know, what input to use for what kind of soil and stuff. So the extension service then becomes very important. And I think what you're raising, and also I think you made this comment initially about, so we're talking about financing the sector. I think if the farmer cannot connect why they're not getting extension service, even with the current budget, then even rallying the farmer to start engaging government to increase the financing of the sector also becomes very difficult, because the farmer will be like, okay, I'm not even getting anything, or the things I need to get from the current allocation. Why should we ask for more, first of all, before getting this? Which comes to the question of, even as we push for more funding, also need to push for efficiency in how we use the current allocation. And I totally agree with you when you say extension service, because even the study that we did shows that, you know, in places like Makueni and Nyeri, you have a ratio of farmer to extension officer, you know, 1 to 2,000 farmers. That is not feasible. It's impractical, right? So I totally agree, you know, that there are really issues that we need to kind of like, you know, pick and discuss. How do we first of all get the current budget to work and deliver with the farmer as a way of also showing goodwill to the farmer that if we get more funding, then, you know, services will improve, you know, better markets, better extension, better credit, and things like that. And Agatha, you talk about just a bit, and also you can add your voice to this, the idea of the farmer facing a challenge in accessing credit because of the risk of farming. I don't know, what would be your reaction to that? We can start with that.
Yeah. And I'm happy that part of our audience are farmers so that they can hear this. That if you look at the distribution of our smallholder farmers, the government did collected data from farmers, and I think we have 6 million plus smallholder farmers in this country. And if you look at the size of the land that is being cultivated by smallholder farmers in this country, it's really dwindling. It's decreasing because of land subdivision and all that. So it is becoming apparent that it's very, very difficult to work with the individual smallholder farmers, even in terms of inputs, accessing inputs. And I'm happy that the government has introduced a ministry that is specifically looking at cooperatives and SMEs, so that we can organize our smallholder farmers better. Even from a private sector perspective, for the farmers to be able to access markets, they need to be in groups, because the costs of providing support to individual farmers is extremely high. So I think it's very important, and in some of the areas the government is actually doing this, but we need to really fast track this process so that we lock the farmers into strong farmer institutions like cooperatives. That means if a farmer is a member of a cooperative, it's possible to channel credit through their cooperatives. And in some of the cooperatives, this is happening. In fact, the private sector is also finding an opportunity to support. Some of the banks who are our members are also finding an opportunity to work with the farmers when they are in strong cooperatives. So this is what I would urge that we fast track, so that every individual smallholder farmer is locked in some cooperative. The other beauty of farmers being in a cooperative is that production can support, from a market side. You know, a lot of times, because I have also been an extension officer, I at some point worked with the government. Farmers just wake up and decide this is what I want to produce without having in mind where they want to take the product. And I think when we have them in cooperatives, it becomes very easy for the extension officers to access them, for all of them to agree this is what we need to produce, so that we can get an off-taker. And we are not short of off-takers in the private sector. For example, a lot of our off-takers and exporters, they need produce from the farmers, but sometimes it's very difficult to get it in terms of quantities, in terms of standards, and the bottom line is that everything starts at strong farmer institutions. Strong farmer institutions. That way, it will become a lot easier to access credit. I am a member of this project, a member of the National Technical Advisory Committee of the NAFCDP project that is funded by the World Bank. And they are very good attempts to support the farmers through cooperatives. But the farmers must also agree to belong to the cooperative so that credit can be channeled by our financial institutions, including the private sector, through the cooperatives.
Yeah. Just before I continue, address the question of the farmer having trust issues with the cooperatives.
Of course, we have a history.
Yeah.
We have a history. When I was growing up, cooperatives were very, very strong. Very strong. And in fact, a lot of young people, a lot of parents were able to get credit from cooperatives even to take their children to school. But of course, issues came and it's kind of cooperatives disintegrated. But I think there is a strong goodwill at the moment, if you ask me.
Yeah.
I have moved around the country and I have seen very, very strong cooperatives that are supported by members. But what is very important is that the members of the cooperative get their own leaders. Their own leaders. Let the farmers elect their own leaders because they know each other. Because some of the issues that have bedeviled our cooperatives is actually corruption, poor leadership, and lack of accountability, poor management. And the farmers know who is a good leader within their vicinity. They also who is not corrupt within their vicinity. So when I work with the farmers to support them to form cooperatives, I have stepped aside and asked them, can you give me leaders? And sometimes through secret ballots, can you give me leaders that you want to lead your cooperatives? And sometimes they'll give very, very good people because they know them.
Yeah, great.
So what I can confirm, having been out in the field now for some time and moving to different counties, is that there are some very strong cooperatives that are coming up. But cooperatives also need to be managed in terms of scale. Sometimes the purpose or the objective of forming a cooperative is wanting, because some people form the cooperatives from a very selfish motive.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about that more, because it's part of building the trust and rallying farmers to be part of a collective process and systems for ease of access services and stuff. So I don't know. So your reaction on the credit issue and the risk of the farmer, but also then you can touch on
the cooperative things.
Cooperative questions.
So I think we have to accept that we have a problem in financing agriculture. Only about 4% of commercial credit goes to agriculture. So what does that mean? It means that farmers now have to go for very expensive credit, where you're getting money from Shylocks or input lenders, and you're paying almost 100% interest rate. So there is nowhere you can support a business model when you have that high cost of capital. So why is this the case? Partly is what Agatha is saying, but I think for me, and from what we've learned in studies that have been done in other countries, unless we address the question of why our cooperatives failed, it's not the magic wand, right? So cooperatives have to be run professionally as businesses. So the fact that you have farmers as decision makers doesn't necessarily mean that they should be the ones running that cooperative on a day-to-day basis. They have to get professionals to be able to run that. Secondly, they have to innovate, right? So without innovation, what they'll just be selling primary produce, which again does not necessarily grow the cooperative. So they have to grow, they have to be innovative and find that niche in the market that they can address. And we have examples of cooperatives in different value chains that have actually done this. I don't know whether I'm allowed to mention the names of the cooperatives, but we've seen like a dairy cooperative in Nyeri that introduced something that the market has never seen. They went to yogurt. They realized everybody was just doing vanilla and strawberry. Then they brought in their coffee flavored yogurt, and it's nobody else is doing coffee yogurt in the country. So that is a niche, and you're basically, and that tells you that they're doing innovation. So we need to go back and learn from that cooperative. How did that happen? Whom did they partner with? Because they're not the ones who did that. They partnered with the university, some food technology, somebody who figured out that we could actually do this. So we need those innovations. We have cooperatives like Moya that have a very strong brand, and everybody tries to mimic that. So how? But then they operate as a almost like a private limited company, right? But it's a cooperative. So that professionalism helps them access credit. The other reason why we struggle with accessing credit in agriculture is because the government has failed in its job to provide public goods. So even as individuals, so how many farmers today can go to a bank and say, give me 5 million, I want to go farming? Very few farmers. And you have to be like a super commercial farmer with registered as a company for you to be able to access that. Yet, if the government did its job in providing public goods, then that will enable banks to recalculate the risk. Public goods means that do we have data on our production trends? Do we have data on the shocks that we are likely to get? So that how are we assessing the risk of the different farmers? So that we are not saying that you can only access credit when you are in a cooperative. But as an individual, we have enough information that can help, whether it's the lenders, to be able to make a calculation on what is the risk of this farmer vis-a-vis this risk farmer. So that can only happen if the government provides public goods. We cannot we cannot leave that to the private sector. If the private sector does this, first of all, they will not share it. Right? Even the farmers, even the lenders, for example, and Agatha, these are some of them are your members. Equity does not share their data with cooperative. Cooperative does not share because those they're in business, right? So it has to be a public good where the government says these are production trends for the different scale of farmers in the different agricultural ecological zones. These are the weather patterns. So that informs the risk that farmers are likely to face, and it will bring down the cost of credit.
Which also then means talking about things like insurance.
Insurance, yes.
And then also then addressing the question of the farmer is producing on a seasonal basis.
Yes.
And then the bank wants payment every month. So how do you...
Remember, even insurance, how are you calculating the premium?
Which is a public good.
Yes, that's a public good because if the government creates information or a public information database that allows for easier calculation of the risk, then you don't have to think that you are charging 3 or 4 times what should be the fair price of that particular premium.
Perhaps
yes.
if I could jump
Please
in,
do.
which is that maybe the government will look like how are we strengthening our farmer cooperatives. I'm saying this because we were in a conversation with one of the development finance institutions, and they were saying that credit is there, but the cooperative do not meet the criteria for them to be lended. So it's look, how do we, like Agatha talked about, how do we professionalize cooperatives in the way that they can be able to attract a funding? And then we can also look into things like credit guarantees to commercial banks so that they can be able to extend to farmers. And for farmer not to be viewed again like a high risk. And also to look at data like Timothy has mentioned. Can we have projection data how the farmer or the cooperative has been performing? And can we use this data as collateral, for credit to be extended either to the cooperative or to farmers? I think we can have mechanism in place, both and in this case, both the private sector and the government need really to work hand in hand to enable that financial inclusion for farmers.
Great. So if you ask me, just maybe very, very briefly, data is lacking. For example, and I like what she has really said, that it's possible for the cooperatives to access credit if they have data, because you can use the data and what they have as collateral, but it is lacking. And this is where we also want the government to invest. For example, we need to know within a cooperative, how much of fertilizer is this particular cooperative able to absorb? It's possible for that cooperative to access the fertilizer through economies of scale. I can tell you some of our youth in the private sector, they've taken their own initiative to collect data from certain cooperatives, and they are making business out of it, including creating employment on the basis of data. So if you can have data that is disaggregated, I know the government is really doing a lot. They've done a lot of they've done a lot of data for smallholder farmers. That is why we know the number. But we need this data disaggregated so that we know that in this particular area, these farmers are growing this product. These are the requirements, and that is also what forms the basis for private sector entrance into a cooperative, so that we can also mobilize private sector investments.
Right. So I just want to see if there are questions from our audience before we go to just just final few questions. As we go along, let me know if there are questions, and then so that we can just do a quick more round of these questions. So we've talked about the kinds of investments that the government must do. And that enable then private sector also to participate, but also the farmer to produce. And I will come back to you, Agatha, on this, just kind of like, just again, I know you've talked about this, but if you can just also synthesize and give key critical examples of what kind of enabling investments and policy or infrastructure or direct investments does the private sector need to boost its role in agriculture. Okay. So you mentioned some of them, but you can still,
You want us to respond to the questions first, or I go in?
Well, the questions will come,
will be coming.
and then, but just let's respond to this.
Very well. So, if you look at, for example, the infrastructure in our country, in some of the places it's really wanting. There are places that the private sector cannot just, access. Okay. In terms of supporting the smallholder farmers within those jurisdictions, because first of all, the road infrastructure is very bad, and I think this is one of the areas where the government really needs to invest in, whether it is counties, whether it is the national government, the feeder roads. You've seen in some of the counties, they are really doing a lot, the smallholder farmers are really doing a lot, but when it comes to an off-taker literally accessing the product, it's just impossible.
Yeah.
The other thing is that if you look at, and you mentioned this at the introduction, our level of smallholder irrigation coverage is still very wanting. And we are living within a period where we have a lot of climate challenges. The effects as a result of climate change are really, really serious.
Yeah.
Just the other day we had a very serious drought. Then after that we had too much water. It was actually causing devastating effects, and I think this is where we really need the government to come in to mitigate against climate shocks. For example, we need to support our smallholder farmers with irrigation. Definitely, at this point in time, procuring your technologies, including seed, inputs, machinery, mechanization, and then you plant and you wait to see whether it is going to rain. I think we need to get out of that. The smallholder farmers need to be supported with access to sufficient water for irrigation. So I would want to see policies moving towards there. Because you see, when we have sufficient, for example, sufficient of needs by the farmers, that is also how the private sector comes in. For example, if the farmers are producing, and we have been to some schemes where farmers are really doing well. Last week I was in Subukia, and we have some irrigation projects where farmers are really doing very well. They need fertilizers. The private sector is able to come in very, very quickly because they can understand the quantities that are required of which fertilizer at any one given time. So we need the government to be able to do that. I also mentioned that there are investments where the government really needs to come in very quickly, where the private sector cannot, where the private sector will not invest. For example, we need, and I'm happy about the KIPES that are coming up in the counties, although we also need to do them in very good and strong partnerships with the private sector. But we, for example, need within those KIPES very good storage facilities. Farmers are producing, and we are losing a lot because they don't have the requisite capacity to store their produce, and because of poor storage, there is a lot of post-harvest.
Is that an area where private sector can also invest? Is storage an area
the private sector can invest, but private sector invests where they see business. We invest where we see business.
So production levels must be high enough?
Production levels must be high.
Okay.
The environment must be requisite. The infrastructure must be right. And the private sector will come in.
So great.
But where the private sector cannot go, I would really urge that the government moves in very quickly and supports the farmers so that we can have consistency in the production.
Great. So you want to add to this?
No, I want to support what Agatha is saying. I think for us, one of the things that we see the government can invest that can bring a big change is R&D, research and development. The challenges that Agatha is mentioning about climate, even smallholders, these are technologies that researchers can work with private sector and develop technologies that can enhance access.
Yeah.
Magdalene mentioned about access to inputs. Inputs keep changing depending on the different scales, environment. So we cannot just be saying that we'll just provide seed and fertilizer, for example, for crops as a way of trying to improve productivity. But we have to see, how do we innovate? How do we tailor make some of these inputs? And R&D is the first place we begin with. And when we look at even the Green Revolution and look at the Asian countries, the way they did it, they started with that.
Yeah.
Making sure that we have the technologies that we need along the different nodes of the value chain.
Great.
And then allowing the private sector to commercialize some of them. Because, again, it cannot, right now, most of our budget is going to input subsidies. Unfortunately, that is not transformative and it's not sustainable.
Absolutely.
So we have to think of how do we create incentives for the different actors along the value chain to want to support that transformation agenda.
And also what you're saying also is that how do we support the farmer to a level that they are able to afford input, so that then they are not depending on government, so that then government uses the money that they're investing.
I think that's a narrative that politicians use. And Magdalene can confirm this. Farmers are able to afford inputs. Remember, Agatha said that they're also private sector, and they'll put money where they know that they'll get money back. This notion that farmers cannot access input is just a narrative that has been created. But the reality is, we've seen farmers adopting very expensive inputs where they believe that they can make money. So this notion of wanting to give things for free is not transformative.
Correct.
At zero cost, farmers must bear some cost, and then they will own those investments. But if you just provide for free, that is just capture.
Absolutely.
It's not.
Now, I have two questions from our listeners, and a few more are coming. So Kimathi from Nakuru, a farmer, is asking, considering food security is a national agenda, how can we ensure strong collaboration between national and county governments to increase investment in agriculture beyond the fertilizer program, which is also the question that you're raising, like, we need to go beyond the fertilizer thing. You want to take it up?
No, a quick question to what was his name?
Kimathi.
To Kimathi. I think for me, I will look at where do we get our fertilizer from. Kenya doesn't manufacture fertilizer. We only blend and pack, right? We import the raw materials. So right now, at the global market, the prices for raw materials, whether you're talking about rock phosphate, or the prices have gone down to the pre-shock prices that we saw at the 2021. That's when the fertilizer prices started to go up. So it means that if we are experiencing high cost, we have inefficiencies within our market. Part of it could be taxes. Part of it could be high transport costs. Remember, our fuel is very high. So we have to think of how do we address the inefficiencies within our market, so that if I was getting the fertilizer, let's say at Mombasa, and I'm getting it at, let's say, 1,500 shillings, how much does it cost to move that fertilizer from Mombasa to Kitale? Right? So we do have inefficiencies, which you have to own up. But what we know is that, and then if you want to give subsidies, we can give subsidies like in 2022, because that one was nobody's fault. The market just went crazy. And at that point, to cushion the farmers, you had to subsidize. But then right now, there is no need to subsidize, because the farmer who was affording 3,000 in 2021 can still pay 3,000 today. And the market can actually offer the fertilizer at 3,000 today, even if there's no subsidy. So if you bring fertilizer to 2,500, what is the cost of bringing that fertilizer from 3,000 to 2,500? And what are we getting in return? So those are questions that we must ask ourselves as we talk about the efficiency of public expenditures. Is there a way that we can spend this money better? If we took that budget for fertilizer and we put it, for example, on extension, are we able to see the bump in productivity that if a farmer is able to raise his production from 7 bags to 12 bags,
because of the technical knowledge,
that is getting through extension, then he will not be bothered by the 3,000 price, because he knows that from the output that he's able to get, he can actually pay for.
And he can get access to markets.
Yes,
then he's
because
making money
Agatha
that
mentioned, we have,
yeah.
I think it's 30,000 network of agro dealers.
Yeah.
They can get that fertilizer to where he needs it.
Yeah.
So we no longer have to go through NCPB to provide this.
Great.
So those are and that efficiency
Yeah.
comes when now we start thinking of what are we really trying to address? Is it the cost of production? Because the cost of production does not necessarily mean that if you lower the cost of fertilizer, the cost of production has come down. Because if our yield does not increase, our cost of production will still be high regardless.
Yep, that's true. Any reactions to this before I ask the next question?
Yes.
Just a few seconds.
Yeah, just a few seconds.
Yeah.
You know, for production, we must look at what we call gross margins. And like he said, subsidizing is not sustainable. Because what happens, for example, when the government is not able to make sufficient money to subsidize? So we need to look at what are the gaps, for example, in the production of maize. It's possible for us to look at what opportunities do we have to increase production per unit area, and therefore be able to have a markup to cater for what is being subsidized at the moment.
Yeah.
And for every, and this is not just for maize, for every enterprise we need to look at what is the gross margin, what are the returns to the investments that the farmers are making. Even
Correct.
you for example, if you're a farmer,
Yeah.
sure you cannot be producing something every year and you're not getting anything.
You still need different
out of
input
it.
every year.
You must look at
yeah.
what is it that I'm not doing that would be able to make me get more from what I'm doing.
Great. I'm going to be a farmer next year, so that's a very good point. So this question is for you, Magdalene, but also everyone can react to. So Kimei from Elgeyo Marakwet County is asking, what action can citizens take at the grassroots level to push the government to invest more in agriculture? What are the entry points? Can take it up.
So number one is, are the citizens or the farmer engaged or participate in CIDPs, because that's really the start when you talk about budgetary allocation at the county level. So do we have engagement so that it captures the farmers' needs in that particular county? So as farmers or even as citizens is really to ensure that they're engaging the county government, number one, but also them being aware of the issues within their counties, or even just the budgetary allocation that has been allocated to agriculture within the county. So there is one, that awareness or other capacity, but also the capacity to engage their county government. And maybe to go back to Kimathi's question in how the national and the county can work, for me it starts with how much is the county allocated, how much is the national government allocating to agriculture, because that trickles down to the counties. And also is now that the government has devolved its function, also can we have some of the initiatives that the government has in place? They talked about irrigation, the irrigation schemes, the fertilizer subsidy. Can we also have that being devolved to the county?
Yeah, great. And then one last question before we just wrap up. Is David Mutuku from Masinga is asking, what role does technology play in unlocking agriculture's full potential? I know we've talked about this a bit, but you can just add to that. Who wants to take up?
Yeah,
Yes.
I will, but let me also say, maybe just to mention, to add something to what she said.
Yeah.
I think farmers agreeing to participate in public participation is very important. But at the same time, we must look at agriculture in terms of a supply chain. It's not just about production. We must also focus on the market. The policies, even at the market level, must be right. So I think we need to address the entire supply chain, not just what the farmers are doing, because the transporters must make some margin. Similarly, the millers are part of us. We must put good policies in place. And like he said, the level of taxation, the taxation in this country is a bit high, and that is why a lot of businesses are not breaking even. And that's a conversation we need to have about the entire supply chain, not just the farmers, because farmers are doing production, but there's a whole lot of other activities that are happening. Absolutely. So in terms of technology, that's a very, very good question. You said he is Mutuku?
Yeah.
Mr. Mutuku?
Yes.
Technology is everything. Innovation is everything. And if you are going to make more returns from our investments in the agriculture sector. We must go for technology. We must go for innovation. She mentioned she is in digital. She is in digital agriculture. Farmers need instant access to information. That is part of technology. Let me just give an example that I like giving. There is a time I was doing potato production. And if you look at the cost of producing potatoes or planting potatoes by hand, it's extremely high. And at the same time, even the people, the laborers or the workers to assist you to do that are not available because a lot of young people are not in the rural areas. So it becomes extremely expensive until I learned that there is a planter that can actually be able to do potatoes, you know, ridge the soil, spread the fertilizer, spread the seeds, and also be able to earth up. And you can do 5 acres in a day, something that you cannot achieve by hand, manually. So technology is everything because it will ensure timeliness. Then you're able to, for example, do establishments at the right time, access to knowledge and information and all that.
Now, so let's do this in 30 seconds each. Just
like closing remarks, and then we wind it up. It looks like we need to come back to this studio again to just continue this conversation. Yeah, let's start here. Come this way. Closing remarks, 30 seconds.
Okay. So with closing remarks, one, for our call out as Kenya to the government is to prioritize agriculture because it has demonstrated to be the backbone of the economy for Kenya. So that's one. But really looking at what are the on-farm investments that we are making, that the government is making. Also to look into technology because this is an area that I'm very passionate about. We are living in the age of artificial intelligence, so data is very, very important. Data on production, weather data, financial data for the farmer really to enable to ease access to the services that we talked about, the input, the extension services, the credit. So data really plays a critical part. And I know the government has done some work. As KENAF also, we are doing work around that to enable that our farmers are digitally ready for the digital economy because that's where we want to move our farmers.
Great.
Thank you.
So I think in the discussion about financing, I think it's important to understand that the government cannot do everything. So we need both the government, we need the private sector. And the motivation, and especially from citizens, is to look at where is the government putting money and asking, is the areas in which government is putting money allowing me as a farmer, allowing me as a trader, allowing me as an agro-processor to enhance my business? And what partnerships can we leverage to grow the sector? So once we understand that, then we'll clearly see that agriculture is private sector driven and government supported, not the other way around. As long as our agriculture is government driven, we will never transform. We will always be coming back over and over, year after year, making the same noises again, that we are not putting much money, we are not seeing the growth in the sector, we are not creating jobs, we are still struggling with food production. But once we understand that all of us have a role to play, so that we move away from these tokens. Tokens where somebody says that we want to give farmers free seeds or free fertilizer. That is tokenism, and that is not transformative. What we need is systems. We need to make sure that the systems that Agatha mentioned, some of it is infrastructure, some of it is markets. And what we've seen is that wherever there is market, even without government intervention, the sector thrives. Farmers make investments, they take the risks, and people participate in those value chains. So we need to get to a point where we are not saying that we don't need government, no, and that should not. The point is we need government to make the right investments that allow other people to come in and grow the sector.
Absolutely. Thanks.
Yes, our ASNET members are in all the different nodes of the supply chain. Some of them are in farm input supply, others are supporting production, others are supporting infrastructure and logistics, others are in value addition and even markets. So you can actually see the private sector and even financing. You can see the private sector is actually involved in the entire supply chain. I think what I would call for is a dialogue let's continually have dialogue for an enabling business environment, and you'll be able. And so far, I'm happy. At least the government is and the private sector, we are speaking to each other. But we need to continually have this dialogue so that should we have, for example, a policy that is not enabling, then we can quickly work on that so that we are able to move.
Great.
And the private sector is ready to continually, give support in all those notes.
Great. Thank you, our panelists. This has been exciting. And you can see the questions coming from our farmers and listeners. The audiences tells you that they are very inspired and they are motivated to engage in this conversation. And I look forward to a moment where the discussion is moving from tokens to more constructive, engagements and investments in the sector. And I just want to close by thanking our audience also in our social media, but to close by saying that from this conversation, the sector is big for all of us, and it can accommodate everybody. But it needs support from everybody, the private sector, the government, researchers and practitioners in the space, because we need knowledge, we need data, we need technology. So everybody must contribute to the sector for it to serve all of us. My name is Timothy Kiprono from the Institute of Public Finance, and I want to bring this to a close for today. We picked this conversation. Let's continue this conversation in our socials. Let's keep the conversation going. As Agatha said, the dialogue must continue. Thank you very much.
Thank you.